when the world is so frozen that even Mr. Freeze experiences a whiteout. Here's your look at the McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse fighting the frozen gold label collection Mr. Freeze. Theorizing absolute zero experimentation would slow the disease inflicting his wife Nora, Mr. Freeze, and his beloved bride are accidentally thrust 16,000 years into the past. Seeking to return to their proper century, the frigid fiend attempts to recreate the unintentional circumstances of his time manipulation experiment, callously unleashing a deadly new ice age upon the surrounding lands. Robin, a brave young warrior from a neighboring tribe, pleads to aid from Batman, the noble leader of the Bat Clan. Recognizing the existential threat to his peoples, Batman, Robin, and a stoic Batgirl forge an alliance to stop the criminal King of Cold. Absence of both heat and color. Before we get a closer look, though, at the Fighting the Frozen Gold Label Edition Mr. Freeze, which basically is a black and white version of the Freeze that we looked at before, let me send out a big thank you to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample we could have a look at. I'm grabbing as well the tape measure to see how tall the figure stands, and then in a moment, I'm going to be bringing in the earlier looked at Mr. Freeze so you can see that they are using the same mold again. Mr. Freeze, though, this time around stands 6.5 inches in height, or the figure's going to be about 17 centimeters tall. Bringing now in the obvious bad guy of 100 below, here's what the figure looks like with the original Mr. Freeze that had a lot more color going for him. One thing also is done differently between the two figures is I still have the tank and the freeze gun still attached to this figure. I will be then in a moment doing it also with this Mr. Freeze. Now I can't help but also draw your attention to the fact that there's a big empty space next to this Freeze, seeing that we did also have another Mr. Freeze released before by McFarlane's team. I can't believe I overlooked the idea of bringing in the other Victor from before. Here's also what the figures look like with the Mr. Freeze that we got released before. Now, we have gotten this guy also in a couple of variation colors. I would like to at some point try to track one down. I think there was one also that was a little bit more closer to the DC Superheroes retro Mr. Freeze that we got in the 80s. And maybe instead of talking about 80s colors, let's talk about a character that has no color, just black and white. Some would even argue the point that black and white aren't real true colors. Those would be the same individuals that would try to tell me that a tomato is a fruit. Oh, the floodgates opening down below. While this Mr. Freeze doesn't have any color, that's one thing that's also shared with the comic and the trading card that come included with the figure as well, as both of them are also black and white. Well, let me just kind of stop myself saying that. It's black and white, at least from the cover, and what a nice cover it is. It features both Batman, Robin, and Batgirl, but then in the background you can see Mr. Freeze's glaring eyes. It's only though black and white on the cover, as if you flip through the pages, you realize it's still the issue that we got before with both the Batman and the Mr. Freeze that we've already had a look at. I've still yet to look at Robin and Batgirl. We will be looking at those in upcoming videos. But I love, again, the artwork featured inside. I mean, again, like some of the best artwork I've seen with some of these page puncher releases is the stuff that we're getting here with Fighting the Frozen. I'm not going to spoil it, of course, for anyone that hasn't had the chance to read this, but a really neat looking issue. If you like the artwork, though, featured on the front, you'll be really loving the fact that it's the same artwork shrunk down in size that gets carted along with the figure as well. You get Mr. Freeze as a name, of course, printed down below, but then you've got the main image there featured on the front of that comic. On the back, though, it's the same read-up that we got from the earlier Mr. Freeze, and I can't imagine why they would have even changed it either. I think it's also, in fact, the same read-up that we got with Batman, and I'm thinking that's also going to be the same read-up that we're going to get with both Robin and Batgirl when we eventually look at those figures as well. For all intents and purposes, I really should have looked at Robin and Batgirl. Batgirl also does get a variant as well, but I couldn't resist not going and looking at the black and white Mr. Freeze before, of course, we look at the rest of the characters. I'm going to move those all to the side here because we won't going to be bringing those back for the rest of this review. What we will, though, on the other hand, though, be looking at is the figure comes included with both his freeze gun and the tank that's attached to it. Attaching the two is a fairly long cord, and it's made of fairly soft plastic as well. When you are attaching this, first the gun only fits in one of his hands. He has a gripping hand on this side, but then he has a closed fist hand over here. So you really only have the one choice to choose from. The gun does fit fairly well into his hands. The plastic that they've used is still pretty dense, though, but I don't even think you really need to even heat it up either. If you just take the handle, for example, and just dowel it into the top of the grip, for example, he more than easily holds the gun without really even having to heat it up in the first place. And, of course, you got yourself just this dangling tank. The tank just attaches on the back of the figure's body. Now, when you are attaching it, you'll see right away that it sort of twists the cording if you do it this way. Rather, if you turn it and have it upside down, which I think is the intended plan anyways, you have a much more loose, easier give for the cord. Of course, you can then attach it, and you can still have enough freedom to then move his arms, and it doesn't feel like he's really pulling and tightening the cord to the point where this is going to start to break. Now, with this, of course, on his hand, the only thing I also would have loved if this could have found some way to detach or found a way to even attach on the back of the figure's body. The thing about it, though, is I may not always want to have the figure displayed with the gun in his hand, but by the fact it's already married to the back of the tank, there's really no other place to store the gun, for example, if you don't want to always have it in his hands. Getting, though, a closer look at Mr. Freeze, it's, though, obviously, stating already the obvious, it's the same head sculpt and the same body as one we got before. It's just more a personal preference. And while this may be more a color by numbers Mr. Freeze that only really just has mostly just a white cast plastic and all the additional black accents, for the full color effect, then you'll probably want to be getting the original Page Punchers Mr. Freeze, which again we already had a look at on this channel. All the same things on a sculpt level are exactly carried over to this new Mr. Freeze that again just doesn't have any additional color applied to it. And while it is maybe lacking the color, it doesn't still, I think it still delivers the sculpt that I really liked in the figure in the first place. It sort of has more of like an old scuba tank look to it. I at one point jokingly said it looked kind of like a Mr. Freeze, like from a Scooby-Doo cartoon, or even just a scuba suit monster that the gang of Mystery Incorporated would run into. The colors, though, again, while not really having a whole lot of them, but the black is the thing that really does accent the figure really nicely. In a way, it does look like a color by numbers Mr. Freeze, but the black, at least that they've applied, are in places that make logical sense. If you, for example, look at the light sources sort of shining down from this side, then all the parts that aren't getting exposed to sunlight, for example, would be then naturally darker. So he has it on the undersides of his arms, for example, sort of has it on the under areas of his tank, or the under area of the helmet area here. And then he also has it, say, on then this side of the body, which, if you look at it, it's the opposite direction of where the light's hitting it. So it's going to hit it from here. Of course, it's going to be casting the shadow sort of this way. And then the shadow is then going to start to settle on this side of the figure's body. So they have smartly and selectively chose where the coloring is going to be. It isn't just a case of let's just throw black here, let's just throw white here. No, they were really smart with the way they applied it. Even when you're looking at really the legs, the light is hitting here. The black, of course, and the shadow is going to hit on this side of the figure's body and on the interior of the legs as well. So again, it's a really nice use of an additional black without just having a rhyme and a reason. It does have a rhyme and a reason instead of just them selecting, hey, let's just change this color black. Let's just, again, change this that part white. On the back of the figure's body, because again, there's not as much light hitting it, all this section of his body is black. Now, there would have been a nice way to kind of incorporate some additional lines of white here. I mean, because again, it's just so much black happening. If they had only added a few little bands, now I know I'm breaking the whole law of the idea of casting shadow, but if they just put a little bit of white or something in there, because like there are a few little areas where there's just so much black happening, just a little bit of white breakup would have gone a long way. But all, it's still a nice looking figure of Mr. Freeze. For obvious reasons, I think I still like the original Mr. Freeze just because, again, it's got all the cool colors. Oh, I see what I did there. It has all the cool colors that I liked on Freeze in the first place. All the darker, kind of that bluish gray, for example, making up the majority of his body, not to mention all those silver accents. It really does showcase a sculpting that was so superior in the first place. This one, though, unfortunately doesn't have as much the color, but it still really gets you a chance to see all the work that was the talented artists behind the scenes as they built and designed this body from the ground up. Now, we're going to go ahead and just remove the gun right now, just because, again... Oh, one thing I actually did want to mention before we talk about the figure's articulation. Something I did, though, say about the other Mr. Freeze. He does have, like, these little areas on this side, for example, that have... I'm guessing they're still supposed to be icicles. It sort of does change a little bit in the comic. And then he's also got these little icicles on the top. They don't really read as much as icicles as maybe the original Mr. Freeze, because the original Mr. Freeze, going back to him, definitely had the colors approached a little bit differently for those ice sections. So I thought they stood out a little bit more. This one actually kind of comes across like more, he's got like feathers, like little things that are sticking out the top of his body. Other than that, I mean, there's no real way that they could have fixed that and done it differently, because, of course, it being ice, it still has to follow the same rules of being black and white. So, of course, it does kind of look, as a result on this figure at least, a little bit more like feathers. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the figure's articulation. It's still going to be obviously all still the same. He has the ball joint in the head, so it does rotate all the way around. Get a good gander at those peepers. Love the look of Mr. Freeze's eyes there. Head does look up that far. Head does look down about that far. And again, you can rock it back and forth as well. Now, the upper torso is on a ball joint. It's going to be a little bit harder, obviously, to start moving things around when you got a big tank on the back of the figure's body. But the figure has a ball joint, so you can rotate it all the way around. The arms do rotate all the way around, but not something you probably would best advised to do when you got the hose attaching it, because of course if you're going to rotate it, that's going to start to tug on this. I'll show you on this side at least. You can take the arms and rotate them all the way around. The figure's arms come out at 90 degrees. There is a bicep swivel, but the swivel is actually not so much here in the bicep, it's swiveling here in the elbow, and it also hinges back and forth with only just a single hinge. Hands also rotate also back and forth. The legs do split, they're unratcheted joints. Even though he's a chunky fellow, he still manages to have the ratcheted joints on the insides of the legs, and you get about that far of a splits on Mr. Freeze. You can take the legs and move forward. You can take the legs and move them back. There's a swivel at the top of the thigh. There, in a way, looked like there was a swivel cut right here. I don't know if I actually had mentioned that when we looked at Mr. Freeze from before. But the way that they've cut this in, for a second it looked like there was going to be a swivel joint right there, but there's not. There's only a swivel at the top of the thigh, and then there's a swivel here in the knee where you can rotate it. And it actually rotates just underneath the kneecap, and then you can also bend that back and forth as well. The feet move up and down this way, and you can also rock the back and feet back and forth this way, and the figure also still retains toe articulation as well. This may very well be a figure that I don't think, if you were to, say, collect them, if, say, you were able to track down the gold edition Mr. Freeze, I feel like this would be a figure that you'd likely want to keep still in the packaging. For the purpose of course, reviewing them, I wanted to get this guy out of the packaging so you guys can see the differences between the two. Same mold, yes. Same fantastic mold, sure. It's just a case of whether you prefer your Mr. Freeze in color or you prefer your Mr. Freeze in black and white. I still think it's well worth picking up whether you decide to keep this guy still sealed on card. And I certainly don't mind if you guys would do that, because obviously it's a good looking figure that maybe would stand out a little bit more, especially if you have him on display with the rest of the Fighting the Frozen figures. Rather, instead, I think you probably would just end up getting the colorized version of Mr. Freeze and have those displayed then loose. This will be likely a Mr. Freeze you're going to keep on card. Or if you decide to open him up in all his splendor, like I've got right now, it's an interesting take on Mr. Freeze. Still a great looking head sculpt, still a great looking body sculpt, just with a little bit lacking of the color. While I was opening up black and white Mr. Freeze, part of me did have a reluctancy as to whether I really wanted to have this figure loose. Now, obviously, as a reviewer to present this guy to you, I wanted to make sure that I was able to showcase the figure and all the finer features that he has, and I wouldn't be able to pull that off, obviously, by still keeping him in his clamshell prison. Rather, though, now that I've opened him up, it really gives me now a chance to kind of have this guy posed. Sometimes while just keeping figures relegated into their packaging, you don't really get a chance to be able to showcase, really be able to pose, and really be able to appreciate sometimes these figures. There will always still be figures I'll want to keep still sealed, and those are those variant figures where I may already have a figure that's on my shelf. I may decide to get a second one, or if I have one that's only slightly varied on paint, I'll always keep that one still sealed, and I'll keep the main one, the obvious one, the primary one, the one that I have on the shelf. Mr. Freeze, though, is one that I am happy now that I've actually gotten opened up, just because, again, like, you get a real chance to experience the work that they put into this piece. It was the case also when we looked at the original Fighting the Frozen Mr. Freeze, and I still think it's one of my favorite Mr. Freeze figures. We don't have a lot to really choose from. We only have the other Mr. Freeze. But, I mean, the design of this one, I would certainly say, top 15 figures easily for the stuff we've gotten from McFarlane's team is the Fighting the Frozen Mr. Freeze. There's just too much charm, I think, with the original suit, and I think it's carried over nicely here. It doesn't have as much the grays, the silvers, and all those little accent colors that they've added in the red and the blue, but what it does still have and what it still retains is the sculpting that they put into the figure in the first place. This figure poses really well. He's short, he's squat, he's stocky, but he still poses really fantastic. And especially with the way that they've darkened the areas of his body, it really gets you a chance to kind of see the lighter tones, the darker tones of both the black and the white. Whether those are colors or not, it still makes for a really nice, interesting Mr. Freeze when you put him on the shelf. What do you guys think of the black and white Mr. Freeze? Let me know down below in the comments section. And if you already have the original Fighting the Frozen Mr. Freeze, is there enough interestingness to this figure that's worth picking him up if you guys are able to find him? Let me know if you already have that in Mr. Freeze, that original Mr. Freeze. Would you still be interested to get this version as well? Once again, a big thank you to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did provide this sample of the Fighting the Frozen Gold Label Edition Black and White Mr. Freeze. Of course, as always, guys, if you guys enjoyed this video, I want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and you would like to stick around for more, we have wrapped up things, obviously, right now for the black and white Mr. Freeze, but rest assured there will be more DC Multiverse reviews coming your way. The key to making sure that you're not missing out on anything that the person behind the camera is churning out regularly, keeping in mind that Monday to Friday, at least 2 videos a day, sometimes even on the weekends, too. So with 10 videos always churning out weekly here on this channel, there's always a good chance that you might miss out on something. So the things of hitting the the subscribe button down below and the things about turning on the bell notification aren't simply just things that I yammer on about. Those are all things that will help you to ensure that you're not missing on anything that's hitting this channel. One thing that you also can do is popping up at the very end of this video will also be a playlist. So if there is a chance, that's just say you're new to this channel and you may have thought that you may have missed out on some of the, if not all of the 10,000 plus videos we have on this channel. I'm not even making that up either. Popping up at the very end of this video will also be a playlist of other things I've looked at from the DC Multiverse banner. Definitely more coming your way, guys. So as always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.